Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Our thanks to Beanie Wells. He gave us a little bit of look inside that Ohio State program, strengths, weaknesses, and more. Now it's time for us to spin it forward as we do every single week with our big game breakdown. So, Danny, massive, massive game. So many different layers to this. Where does your mind drift first when you're trying to game out the Ohio State-Penn State matchup?
I mean, the first thing, Chip, is who the heck's playing quarterback for Penn State? Is it Drew Aller or is it Bo Pribula, who came off the bench against Wisconsin? And that's probably going to be one of those hold till the last minute. We're not telling anybody until we get there. So from that perspective, and this would also go into the aspect of if Drew Aller's banged up, wow, the importance of getting Nick Singleton and Katron Allen going in the run game, right? And I know this offense has been more explosive. Like they've had more 20-plus yard explosive plays this year than they had almost entirely last year. But that being said, I think it's imperative that they get the run game going. And whether whoever's playing quarterback, I just feel like that's where Ohio State has been vulnerable. This is a team that has to dominate the line of scrimmage, and I think it starts with an offensive line up front against the strength of the Buckeyes' defensive line. Until you establish that, then I think you try to take your shots. You get Tyler Warren involved. You try to start taking those shots. But I think everything starts with Penn State and their ability or inability to get the run game going.
Completely agree, Danny. I like what Bo Pribula did, but ultimately, can he do that against Ohio State? Ohio State is a lot more athletic than Wisconsin was. Wisconsin's defense for a lot of the year wasn't very good. They played three opponents who were really hurting, and all of a sudden they looked way improved, and then Penn State just looked bigger, stronger, faster. But Penn State won't look bigger, stronger, faster on Saturday than Ohio State. They might look equal to Ohio State potentially because they do a great job of strength conditioning, and they do recruit at a high level. But they probably won't be able to just run by Ohio State. So can they run the ball enough, like Danny was saying? I think that's so key because a lot of what Andy Cudle-Nicky, the new offensive coordinator for Penn State, wants to do is going to key off that run game. And you do see him scheme some guys just wide the heck open. So that I could see happening if Penn State can get that run game going.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the injury situation going into this game, first of all, it stinks that we've got this top 5 matchup between these two teams, and there are so many injury questions on both sides. I would rather see these teams playing at full strength than in the current situation, but I'm far more confident in Drew Aller will be playing in this game than I am with what Ohio State is dealing with injury-wise, because I think with Aller, it would look to be, just my pure guess, they're calling it a lower body injury. It looked to be some kind of sprained ankle to me. Now, how badly it was or whatever, it's just, there's no reason for Penn State to tell you he's going to play until they absolutely have to tell you whether he's going to play or not because of the difference in the way that their offenses look between Aller and Pribula. But the biggest question mark is who's starting at left tackle for Ohio State. It's just, can Ohio State run football with whoever is starting at left tackle? Because since losing Josh Simmons, they have had 60 snaps where they have run the ball without Simmons at left tackle. They're averaging 2.2 yards per carry and have picked up no yards or lost yards on 37% of those plays. The run game was non-existent last week against Nebraska. And if you look at the situation in this matchup, Beanie was on earlier. Who's the one player he's terrified of in this matchup? Penn State's Abdul Carter. And if you're Ohio State and you're worried about that Penn State pass rush, the best way to slow it down is to run the ball at it. But if you can't run the ball, then you're really kind of in a, you're in a real bind because the passing game will be disrupted. And if you can't run, it's like you're going to have a very difficult time moving the ball and putting points on the board. So I wonder if this is finally the week we see Ohio State use Will Howard as a runner, because if you've watched this season, the most he's run in a single game, that if you don't include sacks, is 9 times in the Iowa game for 28 yards. He's a much more, effective runner than that, or what Ohio State has bothered using him for. So I feel like if there's ever a week where you're really going to put that QB run game in action, it has to be this week to kind of take some of the pressure off of your offensive line, to make the defense hesitate for even a fraction of a second, to buy your guys a little bit of time to find that hole and pick up yards, because it's going to be hard to get big explosive runs in this game because Penn State truly is one of the best run defenses in the country. But you have to be able to keep them honest to get those plays in the pass game. Like also Beanie mentioned, the lack of downfield threat in the passing game so far this year. If they want to be able to utilize that against Penn State this week, against a secondary that I think hasn't truly been tested by a great passing offense to this point, you need to figure out ways to neutralize that pass rush. And I think the best way to do that is running the ball. Can they?
Yeah, two things. Number one, there was a lot of great commentary and analysis in an article I was reading on CBSSports.com. It's a big time article. It's by Tom Fornelli. That's right. I would suggest somebody go and check that out. It's definitely worth your time. Every single week, Tom's takes on the Big Ten. It's always right around here. So love that, and please go check that out. Second, Bud, you've had your eyes on Ohio State play calling, and that's why my ears perked up when you were able to ask Beanie earlier, what would you like to see them run? So just sort of either from your own conversations with people around football or even from your own knowledge, like Bud, what would you like to see Ohio State start to do in order to maybe counteract some of their injury issues?
I think Tom really nailed it. It's the ability to be +1 in the run game with the addition of the quarterback legs. Ohio State's offensive line was kind of a question coming into this season. When Simmons went down, it became a major question. When Mahalski went down, it became like an all hands on deck. And we said on Cover 3 on our YouTube channel yesterday, like this could be a fatal flaw for this Ohio State team. Like most teams cannot afford to lose two good offensive tackles. You just can't keep good depth now in the transfer portal era. So the ability to be +1 in the run game, to have the defense have to account for an extra hat, I think that really could be the difference here for Ohio State in a game that I don't really think anybody expects to be all that high scoring, because Ohio State's style of defense probably should work against what Penn State wants to do. Like they can hold up in single coverage a heck of a lot better against these Penn State receivers than they could against the Oregon receivers.
Danny, who's a player or an aspect of this game that we're not talking about? I mean, it's one of the biggest games of the entire college football season. We know about Will Howard and his legs. We've got the huge question marks over the Penn State quarterback situation. Where do you think there's that? Because oftentimes it is somebody that's like not the first or second line, but maybe that third or fourth line in the way that you're looking at these two teams in a heavyweight battle. Who's somebody who might step up and be a hero on Saturday?
I'll go with a position group because as much as we were talking about Penn State wanting to run the football, it is running right into the strength of this Ohio State defense, is giving up under 3 yards per carry per rush. So when I look at the group that I think has been non-existent, the one that we've longed to see is Penn State's wide receiving core. Is it Harrison Wallace? Is he going to step up like he did against West Virginia? Is it Julian Fleming who would wake up out of nowhere? And we all know about Tyler Warren, and we heard Beanie Wells saying they're going to have a plan for Tyler Warren, which they will. So which wide receiver, Omari Evans, like one of these guys needs to step up, and it's not going to be a game where I think you go off for 150 or even 100 yards plus. It's when those plays are to be made, which receiver for Penn State steps up and makes that play. Like that's the position group I'm looking at as the great unknown, that if Penn State wants to get over this hump, beat this team for the first time in 7 years, that the receivers will have to step up. Even if they're running the ball good, like even if they're running the ball with some success, somebody from that wide receiving core has to step up and make a play for Drew Aller or Bo Pribula, one of those guys.
You know what, Daniel? I'm going to counter your Penn State receivers with Ohio State's secondary, because I'm coming at this from a very similar aspect. Like Lathan Ransom is expected to be back for this game for Ohio State, which is good. He's one of the better safeties in the country. He missed last week's game against Nebraska. But if you look at the matchup, if Drew Aller plays, and that is a big X factor, and I do expect that he is likely to play, so far this season, Penn State, even with the lack of that top name receiver who's making all these big plays, the explosive plays, this offense still ranks 4th nationally in explosive play rate as far as the passing game is concerned. It's usually with Tyler Warren, and they're not a whole lot of 70 to 80-yard touchdown bombs, but they are able to get 15 to 25-yard chunks with a high frequency. And if we go back to Ohio State's game against Oregon, on the season overall, Ohio State's defense isn't giving up a lot of explosive passing plays. They're not elite, but they do rank in the top 20th. But you can also counter that by saying the only real passing attack Ohio State has seen to this point of the season was Oregon, and Oregon tore them apart repeatedly. So can Penn State do that, or can Ohio State adjust? Can Denzel Burke have a much better day than he did against Evan Stewart? Can the return of Lathan Ransom help this secondary keep things in front of them and force Penn State to put together much longer drives if they're going to find the end zone or settle for field goals? I think that will be a key part of this game as well.
See, that's what I'm talking about. So, we talk about all these headliner things, but really it might be some groups that are a little bit spotty that are lining up against each other to see who's going to end up bringing it on a really, really big stage. I love that there. Penn State's pass catchers against Ohio State's secondary. Okay, Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern time is when we will unfurl our best bets for this matchup as part of our locks episode. But here on CBS Sports Network, I figure we can give some leans, or at least an early notion on the way this might end up being decided. So, Tom, what's your early thought on what ends up happening on Saturday in Happy Valley?
Well, something's got to give here, Chip, because James Franklin is 1-8 versus top 5 teams and 1-9 versus Ohio State, while Ryan Day's only 2-6 versus top 5 teams. One of them has to improve their record slightly on Saturday. Right now, just based on injury situation, I don't have a super high level of confidence in anything, but I'm leaning Penn State.
I'm leaning a little bit more of an Ohio State low-scoring game. Like I think the race to 21 takes this home.
I'm with Bud, leaning towards a lower scoring game. And my goodness, I loved Penn State a couple weeks ago. Maybe after that USC game, Drew Aller took a step forward. Very much keeping an eye, trying to find out if he's starting or not. But even if he is, how banged up is he? And how about Will Howard throwing some gasoline into the mix here, saying how much he felt, he's stoked for this game because Penn State didn't think he was good enough coming out of high school. A little chip on the shoulder that's growing by the day as we get closer to this game. But I do think it'll be lower scoring.
I know Julian Fleming is a huge fan of the Cover 3 podcast, so he's obviously locked in. So I want to say, Julian, this is your moment. People will forget anything that's ever happened. You show up in this game, you win this game for the Penn State and Indy Lions, you'll go down in history. So I'm looking at the home dog here as we sit here in the early parts. We'll see if I'm still feeling frisky by the time we get to Moneyline Sprinkles on Thursday.